Between 1945 and 1980, the majority of countries that had been colonies of Europe had gained their freedom through either war or a peaceful transition. And this is their story. This is a fun fact. This is a country of every map that England has ever invaded. So as you can see, there's not much on the map that they haven't tried to take over. All right, so a question to think about are what challenges do newly decolonized countries face? Such as what government are they going to have? What's their economy going to be based on? For a lot of these countries prior to their independence, their economy was based on exporting raw materials, importing manufactured goods for their mother country, or doing limited manufacturing. But again, that was mostly controlled by the mother country. What type of, do they have the economics for an infrastructure? Again, that had mostly been controlled by the former European colonizers. So again, these countries almost had to start from scratch or take what the Europeans left and try and build upon that. And that was a tough challenge. So what did they face? Undeveloped economies, environmental troubles, lack of expertise and resources, and inexperience in resources. Again, depending on what country they were and who their mother country was, most of the indigenous people or the local ethnic groups did not have a lot of experience in governing because the former European colonizers did most of the governing, depending on who was in control. There were a lot of challenges post-independence. It was not this wonderful, sunshiny experience for most of these countries. There was a lot of rivalries due to the ethnic borders, arbitrary borders that the Europeans created when they drew up these colonies. One obviously big place would be Africa, when they put lots of different ethnic groups together that historically had not been together, and that created a lot of civil war that resulted after independence, as well as in India, where you have India, which is predominantly Hindu, and East and West Pakistan, which are predominantly Muslim. But the issue was that East Pakistan wanted Islam to play a lesser role in government, where West Pakistan wanted Islam to play a more larger role, and that led to a civil war. By 1973, East Pakistan was new country of Bangladesh. This is a map that shows the ethnic division within Africa. It's overlaid by the current political borders that were created by the Europeans in the 1880s. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of diversity within Africa, which you can see why there's so much conflict even today, 20, 30 years after the majority of Africa has gotten independence from Europe. Let me correct that, since all of Africa has gotten independence. Population is going to be a challenge for most of these independent nations. They're going to see a huge population increase due to, one, improved standards of living overall, for the fact that the introduction of the UN coming in and providing vaccinations for children, education for mothers about prenatal care, and providing some supplementation of food as well. And so that is going to help. Another situation is most of these countries are based on agriculture. And when you have agriculture and you need a large population to make agriculture feasible when you're not doing it through mechanization. So you have a huge population boom as well in regards to that, because most of these countries were not industrial based because they don't have the infrastructure to make it happen. Again, Europe adapted to this huge population that they underwent in the late 1700s, mid 1800s by colonizing places and by having those people go, their population overflow, go to those colonies, as well as industrializing. But that situation was not possible for these former colonies. And this is a map that shows that population growth. As you can see, China and India have the largest population increase. China obviously was never a colony of anyone, but that was just more due to their agricultural based economy up until the mid 1970s under Deng Xiaoping. India has always been very agriculturally based, and then Africa is right behind it as well. Latin America is a little bit lower on the scale, but that has a lot to do with their economy is more industrial than Africa or India, but they still have a high population growth compared to Western Europe because a lot of the teachings of the Catholic Church in regards to birth control and things like that. And this shows an average increase in population. So if you look at the map, the yellow areas are where you can see a population decrease. The darker red areas are where you see a population increase. And orange is relatively stable when a population is replenishing itself, but it's not going overboard. Africa, India, the Middle East are where you see your larger concentrations of population. Now China is orange, but China is still seeing growth, but it has slowed due to the one-child policy. But again, that has recently changed. So China might continue to go more towards from orange to red. All right, so population, like we said, India, population soars. Africa is going to have to deal with the AIDS epidemic, but which prevents the same level of growth that India and China are going to see, but they will continue to grow. Population-wise, it's been hard to kind of mean lower population growth in Africa. One, the cultural traditions, women's worth is based on how many children they bear, but children are also kind of an insurance policy for families because your children are to take care of you as you get older, so you want to have a lot of them. But you also had a high mortality rate prior to the 20th century, so it was still kind of inbred in the psyche that you need to have as many kids as you can. And again, just there's some cultural superstition and just negative view of using birth control, so that also leads to the large number of children. In regards to urban population, you are going to see a growth in urban population. You're going to see the development of some slum settlements on the exterior of cities in these newly free countries because of the fact that the cities are where the jobs are in theory, but they don't have enough jobs to support the folks moving in from the rural areas, so they are forced to squat and develop squatter settlements or slums in the periphery of the city, building on whatever they can, and they are going to have to find jobs that really don't pay that much, or if they really pay at all, more like scavenging. The rural population, you are going to have an overpopulation, so that's going to lead to environmental conditions such as soil depletion, pollution, all kinds of situations. Another, in regards to the environment, for example, in Bangladesh, one of the major industries is breaking down ships. So as a result, what you're going to see is the breaking down of ships and the environmental toll that it takes on those ships. I'm going to put a link in the end of this PowerPoint to show you a video that talks about Bangladesh. And in fact, I'll link it here to where it says Parrot City so you guys can take a look at it. One thing you're going to see is the rise of women in certain countries that are going to take on more of a political role. Women are given voting rights in many of these freely independent countries, but women actually having a huge role in politics is going to be more of the exception than the norm. One example is going to be Indira Gandhi. She was the Prime Minister of India in the late 60s, early 1970s. She's going to guide the development of their nuclear program. She's also going to begin a sterilization program for folks living in rural areas, trying to keep the number of the population growth down in India. Corazon Aquino is going to take over for her husband in the Philippines after a very corrupt dictator by the name of Imelda Marcos in the Philippines, and then Benazir Bhutto will serve as a prime minister for Pakistan for one term. She also played a role as a senator in the government, in the parliament, but she was assassinated in the early 2000s as she was trying to run again for another term. In most colonial societies, what you are going to find is early marriage and large families, because again, that is the value of a woman. And because of the high mortality rate among women, they're going to try to have children as early as they can. It's still a very patriarchal society. And there's also a lot of anxiety over shortages of resources, particularly because of countries that are in civil war, like in Central Africa. There is a drought right now in the Sudan as well. So again, environmentally, but also political conflicts have caused a shortage of resources. The civil war in Syria is another example, but again, so Syria doesn't quite count as a post-colonial country. And in some areas, you have a religious revival of going, I don't want to say religious revival, but in some situations, like in Afghanistan, in other parts of the Middle East, in Africa, places Africa, you find a return to a more strict adherence to religious beliefs. So in some respects, Christianity, in some respects, Islam, following a more strict version of Islam, which is going to impact the treatment of women. But again, this is following trends of when there is issues in a country, people often turn to religion as a sort of strength, and this is what's happening here. You will still, even though these countries have their independence, they are still economically dependent upon the mother countries. So they don't have the economic means to buy machinery or maybe the technical knowledge to do that. So they are still resorted to, in many situations, exporting raw materials and importing manufactured goods. Or what you will see is companies, Western companies or Chinese companies going into these countries and building factories and using land and using their labor to continue to manufacture goods, but not necessarily give the countries a huge profit. But they are, to be able to do that, they are working out trade deals with these countries. So it's a little bit different than prior relationships. Another situation is a lot of government corruption. As the economy gets better, a lot of social reform doesn't happen because, again, the wealth is in the hands of very few. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund will provide loans to these countries. But what a lot of the industrial nations who back these organizations demand is commitments for these countries to buy their products, or to also insist that these countries who are taking these loans make social changes to improve the lives of people. If not, the loans come with very stiff penalties, which often these countries can't pay. What you're also going to see is, as these folks experiment with government, there often leads to civil war, genocide, as you see in Rwanda. And it's an experiment to try and figure out how they're going to govern on their own. A couple examples. In Ghana, we have Kwame Nkrumah, who we've already talked about a little bit before. He is going to gain his independence from Great Britain. As time comes on, though, he is going to become more communist in his leanings and his support. So he's going to identify with Russia, and he is going to alienate his country from the West. So he doesn't get a lot of support from them. So as a result, he's going to suppress a lot of opposition. And eventually in 1966, there's going to be a coup, and Ghana will become more of a military dictatorship. So you're going to see a lot of this going back and forth in Africa, of elected governments versus dictatorships and things like that. A common problem with dictatorships is that they're against communism, so they receive support from the West because this is during the Cold War. They often repress individual rights because, again, they want to have that authoritarian power. A lot of money of the country's economy is going to be spent for military weapons, and again, to protect their regime. And often the leaders become very wealthy because the money is going to them and their supporters as opposed to the country itself. Egypt is an example. In 1952, Gamal Nasser is going to overthrow the Khedives, who have been in power since the mid-1850s. You are going to have a conflict going here. You're going to have the Free Officers movement, who is military. They're going to join with the Muslim Brotherhood, who are a political party based around Islam, and they're together going to overthrow the Khedives. They're going to become political allies. Out of this regime, out of this alliance, you're going to have Nasser, who is going to come to power. He's going to be a reformist dictator. There's just some things that Nasser does. One, he's going to give land back to the peasants. He's going to provide state financed education. He's going to increase the bureaucracy. He's going to subsidize food to make it cheaper and more affordable for people. He is going to kick the British out of the Suez Canal with the US and the Soviet backing, so Egypt has control of it. He also built a dam with Soviet money that is built more on like a swamp, and there were problems with how the dam was built. So as a result, it provides parasites and things get into the water that people were drinking, and as a result, there was a decline in fertility as well as parasites causing blindness. So it was not a great situation with that. A lot of his things succeeded, but a lot of things failed as well because they didn't have the money. And as a result, you had a huge population growth in Egypt that went unchecked during his reign. Nasser is going to be replaced by Anwar Sadat, who is a military general, so you can kind of have a military coup. What Sadat's going to do is he is going to privatize state-run industries, which is going to increase the economy. He's going to try and make peace with Israel by signing these Camp David Accords that were negotiated by President Jimmy Carter in 1979. So what happens with that is that Egypt recognized Israel's sovereignty as a nation, and in return, Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt, which they took in the 1973 war. He's going to provide support for revolutionary movements in the Arab world, and he's going to open up Egypt to US and European investment, which is going to help to modernize Egypt. Anwar Sadat's going to be assassinated in the early 80s as soon as he returns back to Egypt in regards for signing the Camp David Accords. Hosni Mubarak is going to take over after that. He's going to kind of continue Sadat's legacy of moving closer to capitalism. He's going to have corruption within his government. You're going to still have the population increase, but he's going to suppress fundamental Muslims, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood. And as a result, he's going to be ousted in 2011 by the Arab Spring in Egypt. Unfortunately, you're going to have a temporary government that's going to step in that is going to have some success, but also suppress more things. And right now, Egypt is under a military government for the last 2 years. India kind of went a different route with their leadership. What you're going to have is they have a high population growth, and they are going to intervene as well within the government, but it's a little bit different. One, they are going to have a secular government. They're going to move to a parliamentary system of government as opposed to a military form of government. They're going to encourage private and foreign investment to build up the infrastructure. They're going to benefit from the Green Revolution, which was the development of genetically modified seeds. So for example, the first crop to do was corn. So you take the DNA of 3 or 4 different species of corn, you mix them together in a lab, so you get a strain of corn that is drought resistant, parasite resistant, not parasite, but bug resistant, and so you have a higher yield, but at the same time you have to have special fertilizer to grow the corn. And what's going to happen is crop yields are going to increase. It's going to be more expensive, but it's going to help provide a lot of food. In India, it's going to be rice and wheat that they use. And the high-tech sector is going to thrive in India as well. But you're still going to have some disparity between the wealthy and the poor, but the middle class is growing in India. In Iran, you're going to have the Iranian Revolution in 1979, where you're going to have a shift from the Pahlavi Shahs, where kings are going to modernize and westernize the country, but it hurts the middle class more. They're becoming more increasingly secular, which is going to cause a divide in the country because Iran has a very strong Muslim population, and the Shah did show favoritism to the wealthy. So as a result, he's going to have opposition grow, and so you're going to have this shift in Iran of, do they want to be more secular or do they want to be more religious? And in the end, in 1978, when the army refuses to back the Shah, he is overthrown and exiled to the United States, and you will have, being with theocracy in Iran, where you have a parliamentary elected government, but the people who are going to be elected are given the nod of approval by the Ayatollah Khomeini, the Ayatollah who is a Muslim religious leader within Iran. The best example is the Ayatollah Khomeini. He wanted to basically rid Iran of Western influence. He merges religion and politics together to create a theocracy. Women do lose rights such as veiling, and stoning does become common for adultery, but women still have the right to vote in Iran and do have a large role as far as doctors and teachers and things like that, but some of their individual rights have been taken away. Iran is going to fight a conflict with Iraq in the first Gulf War. Well, they're going to fight a war in the early 80s, and what you're going to have is Saddam is going to go into Iran and take advantage of their rich oil provinces. Iran's resources are drained because their military hasn't been updated, so Iraq very quickly is going to defeat them. Khomeini is going to declare an armistice in 1988, and Iran is drained of their resources, and it's going to hurt them developing. But they've been able to play catch up in about the last 22 years. South Africa is a different situation. South Africa is the wealthiest and most populous country in Africa. In 1980, you're going to have the Nationalist Party, where they are largely Afrikaner. They will declare their independence from Great Britain, and they will execute a large part of the apartheid system. This should actually be 1960, not 1980, so there's a typo on this slide. But they implemented a harsh system of segregation when they took over. What they're going to do is the most impoverished areas of the country are going to be designated for the Africans and people of mixed race, and you're going to have a lot of overcrowding and poverty in areas where Africans can live, Black Africans can live, and as a result, if you want to work in the city, you have to have a special ID card to show who you're working for, and if you don't, you're not allowed into the city. White Europeans or Afrikaners and of African descent do not intermix with each other. It's illegal. It was very strict. You're going to have a lot of protesting among African organizations within South Africa. The African National Congress was the South African equivalent of the Indian National Congress. It's declared illegal in the 1960s. Walter Sisulu and Nelson Mandela were jailed because of the protests that they took place against the government. One of the members of the African Congress, Steve Biko, was actually killed while he was in police custody. Nelson Mandela is going to serve over a 30-year prison sentence, but he's going to be released in the early 1990s. Now, as a result, what you're going to start to see is things start to change in South Africa. Rivalries are going to be played up, more hostility is going to grow, the economy is going to be drained because a lot of people are going to be boycotting the country internationally, and conflicts between Namibia and Angola. So because of political pressure, the country is going to change. President de Klerk, who was Afrikaner descent, is going to convince that they have to free the Black Africans, and as a result, what they're going to do is free Nelson Mandela. He will lead a movement, and the Blacks will have the chance to vote in Africa for South Africa the first time. Nelson Mandela will become their first president. And so today, South Africa is all of the Black Africans have the right to vote, but it is still very contentious because the wealth is mostly concentrated in the hands of the whites of European descent. But it is still the strongest economy in South Africa itself. But since Nelson Mandela was elected, you've always had a Black African president elected in South Africa. If for practice you would compare India's independence with, say, Ghana or how Egypt did as a result of independence, that would be a good review.